Welcome back, everybody. Well, if you are a fan of Sabaton and their historical music, as I am, then I'm sure you're already aware they had a new album that came out on Friday. We've already talked about a couple of those songs because they've been releasing some of the songs, and so I've got reaction videos that I've done already to the Christmas Truce, and also, actually, I think we've done two others. We also did Unkillable Soldier, which just came out, I think, in the last couple of weeks. And then Soldier of Heaven. So what I wanted to do is take a little bit of time while I'm waiting to do all of the reaction videos to the rest of the songs and just run you through all 11 tracks on the album. And just take a couple of minutes to talk about each one and just give you just a snippet of the historical background behind those songs while we're waiting for me to do the reactions to the rest of those songs. So let's go ahead and take a look. I'm going to pull up the playlist over on Sabaton. I'm not going to play the songs, so we won't have any copyright issues or anything like that. But I'll pull up the playlist and let you see the video playing. All of the songs are available on their YouTube channel. The lyric videos are available. So let's go ahead and dive into Sabaton, The War to End All Wars, all 11 tracks. All right, well, the first track is, appropriately enough, Sarajevo. Sarajevo is the location of the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, and his wife Sophie. They were killed by a 19-year-old named Gavrilo Princip. That is traditionally pointed to as the spark that lit the fuse that became the Great War, the First World War, the War to End All Wars, which is the name of the album. This is actually their second album that is dedicated to the Great War. The last one was called Great War. So it's a follow-up. So this is two full albums all dedicated to the First World War. Sarajevo is about that assassination. It took place in Sarajevo, and pretty much self-explanatory. It talks about the shock waves that spread from the Balkans across the globe. You know, that little event that takes place in the Balkans, in southeastern Europe, that turns into a global war. Talks about in the East with the Russians and with his cousin, the Kaiser in Germany. And it talks about how those systems of alliances and the mobilization and everything leads to this war. So that's Sarajevo. Let's take a look at track number 2. The second song is called Stormtroopers. Now, most people in our culture today, when they think of the word Stormtroopers, they think of Star Wars. But a lot of Star Wars is based on the events of the First and Second World War. And the idea of stormtroopers actually does go back to the German Empire. Stormtroopers were this innovation in World War I. You know, the Germans realized that mass assaults over no man's land weren't getting the job done. It was just getting a lot of men killed, and they didn't have a lot of men left to keep getting killed like that. So they developed this small unit tactic, these stormtroopers, who would advance quickly in small groups across no man's land, get down into the trenches, and then fight in the trenches rather than fighting from outside the trenches and assaulting in a mass column. So the song Stormtroopers is about that. It's about this innovation and this kind of preview of what is to come in warfare, new doctrine in combat. So it's a fantastic song, and it really hits you. I mean, this is where the album really opens up, and it's just kind of an in-your-face song, and I love it, and I think a lot of people find this to be one of their favorites on the album. From the people I've talked to so far in live streams and chats, things like that, this seems to be one of the absolute favorite songs on the album, and I won't dispute that. It's called Dreadnought, and it's about the HMS Dreadnought and the new class of these massive battleships that Dreadnought brings into being. And it talks about that name, Dreadnought, the idea that in this ship you don't need to be afraid of anything. That's the concept behind that name. And the chorus is fantastic, and the last line, that hook, is, "And the dreadnoughts dread nothing at all." And at the very end of the song, it actually talks about the Battle of Jutland, which is the one big major battle that we have between these dreadnought battleships before they all kind of go back to port and are not really used much again. It's a fantastic song. Their naval songs always seem to be really, really good, and this one is no exception. I would be willing to bet that most people are going to say this is one of their top 2 or 3 songs on this album. Unkillable Soldier, we've already talked about. I did the reaction to that one. It's so good. And again, it's another really upbeat song. And Sabaton always does such a great job of fitting the music and the lyrics and the feel of the song to the subject matter. This one's no different than that. We've talked about Adrian Carton de Wyatt already, this guy who just never seemed to die, who loved fighting. He actually talked about how he really enjoyed the Great War, which was really unusual. He fought in the Boer War. He fights in the Great War. He ends up a lieutenant general during World War II, ends up a POW in World War II after previously having lost an eye and lost an arm. And he's literally, like, he seems like an unkillable soldier. He's got to be the inspiration for Monty Python's Black Knight in the Holy Grail, where the Black Knight gets one arm cut off and he's like, 'tis but a scratch. I've had worse. That's this guy. This guy is the embodiment of Monty Python's Black Knight. No matter what happens to him, he just wouldn't seem to stop. Also already done the reaction to the Soldier of Heaven, which is the song about the Italian front, that front between Italy and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Italy was on the side of the Allies. Austro-Hungary, of course, is part of the Central Powers. And they just have these fierce battles over and over again in the Alps, in the mountains. And to this day, in fact, there are some very recent stories about them finding these well-preserved bodies of Italian and Austro-Hungarian soldiers who died up on the mountains covered in avalanches. In fact, the song specifically talks about this event known as White Friday, which actually didn't happen on a Friday, and I've talked about that in the reaction, where there was all of this fighting that went on, and they were using the artillery to actually cause avalanches to bring down these mountains of snow on the other side. And many of those men were buried alive in the snow and perfectly preserved for the last 100 years. It's an incredible song, one of my favorites on the album. If there's one song that I was looking forward to the most when I saw the track list and I saw the names of all the songs, it was Hellfighters. This is the one song about American troops that's on this album, and it's one of my favorite stories from the First World War. It's the 369th Infantry. It was a black regiment, mostly recruited out of New York, specifically out of Harlem. They went down in history as the Harlem Hellfighters, and the song's called Hellfighters in their honor. And it talks about things like the fact that they were on the front lines for 6 months. They were on the front lines more days than any other American unit. They took more casualties than any other American unit. But it also mentions in the song some of the key points to their history, besides being 6 months in hell, the fact that they never lost a man captured during the entire war. Considering that they took more casualties than any unit and were on the front lines longer than any unit, to have never lost a man captured, and they never fell back. They never gave up an inch of ground to the enemy. One of the units that we here in America should be the most proud of in our history, and I feel like not enough people know the story of the Harlem Hellfighters. Another song I really love on this album is Race to the Sea. Race to the Sea tells the story of October 1914, when almost all of Belgium has fallen to the German army, and King Albert of Belgium makes the decision, against the advice of many of his generals, to flood the area in and around the Yser. It's known as the Battle of Yser, and they flood the last remaining ground that they hold until the Belgians only hold 5% of Belgium, and the British and the Germans hold the rest. But they hold on to this sliver of Belgium, and Race to the Sea. This is when trench warfare is beginning, and they call it the Race to the Sea, as the lines extend all the way up to the Channel and all the way down to Switzerland. And King Albert becomes this national hero in Belgium for making this decision to flood their own land, to prevent the Germans from being able to occupy it, and to fight this defensive battle that was really costly. But the Battle of Yser is one of those moments that goes down in history for Belgium, and this song, Race to the Sea, is about those events. I think Lady of the Dark might be my favorite song on this album. Not only is it a really good song, but I love the story behind this one. It's probably going to be my next reaction I'll do this week. Milunka Savic, I believe was her name. She was Serbian, and her brother had been conscripted into the army, and she goes in his place and becomes one of the most decorated soldiers in World War I believe she's the only female who receives the French Croix de Guerre. I think with a palm leaf, or however they do like the upgraded version of that. She receives every medal you can think of. And for a good part of the war, nobody knew that she was a woman. She successfully disguised herself as a man, but she ended up getting wounded several times. And one of the times she was wounded, she was at the hospital. They figured out she was a woman. And I don't want to give too much of the story away, but they decide they're going to get rid of her and transfer her to like the nursing corps or something. But they're going to go and find out for sure. And so she stands at attention in the hospital waiting for them. And they said, oh, we'll get back to you tomorrow and let you know if you're going to be allowed to fight. But she stands there at attention and says, I'm going to stand here at attention until I get the answer. And they only took about an hour to decide, okay, you can fight, go back. Incredible story. I'm honestly, it's just really, really tragic that not everybody knows the story of this woman, because it's incredible stuff. And the song is awesome. It's one of my favorites. I love it. A song for the Bulgarians. There's not enough that's talked about the southeastern European part of the war. The Bulgarians come in on the side of the Central Powers. They're really kind of the forgotten partner in that war. You have the Germans, the Austro-Hungarians, the Ottoman Empire, but then you also have Bulgaria. And the Bulgarians fight these battles at a place called Dorian in 1916, 1917, 1918 against a much larger British and Serbian force. And they managed to hold them off in no small part to the leadership of this really charismatic general that they have. And again, it's a really good song that I'm sure is going to be very, very popular, especially with the Bulgarian crowd when they do the songs in that area. The very first song to be released from the album is, I think, probably the best song on the album and one of the best songs that Sabaton has ever done, Christmas Truce. We know the story. I did a reaction to it already. It's the story of the Christmas Truce of 1914 that breaks out on the Western Front. It's such a good song. Their video's great to it. It fits the Christmas season really well with its tone, its message, and even its music. Fantastic song. And then, just as fitting as the first song being Sarajevo, the last song is Versailles, which tells the story of the end of the war. The Treaty of Versailles that is signed in 1919, which is supposed to bring peace to Europe, but really just staves off the next war. I'm not crazy about the song, but I don't think it's really meant to be kind of a standalone song. It's really more of a bookend to the album, and it's got interspersed in it the narration that's telling you about the events of Versailles. So it's really kind of more meant to be an album song. You know what I mean? Like, you've got Sarajevo and Versailles, and then in the middle we've got the stories of the Great War. Sarajevo, by the way, I didn't mention this earlier, is not available on the streaming versions. So, for example, I listen to most of my music on Amazon Music, and Sarajevo is not available on the album on Amazon Music. You can listen to it on YouTube. You can get it on the actual CD. And, of course, they have their history versions of all the songs, which I'm going to definitely get the history version of the album that way. But I'm going to throw some links up here at the very end just to let you check out my existing reactions to 3 of the songs from this album. I'll throw up all 3 of those links for you if you want to check those out. Definitely check out the music if you're into that style at all. You will love this album. I think it's one of the best ones they've ever done. Thanks for watching, and we will see you again soon.